Destiny 2 is at last in our hands. It's been 3 years since the original Destiny launched, and in that time, developer Bungie has put some serious work into its sequel to create a richer, more beautiful world to explore. It's a game that addresses many of the original shortcomings, adding a stronger narrative backbone while improving what already shined in its gameplay and visuals. For one, Bungie's gorgeous vistas return in full force. Finely detailed skyboxes are a trademark for the studio, harking back to Halo. And within the first few hours of the final game, Destiny 2 takes you on a whistle-stop tour of some simply incredible views. From the war-torn skies around a demolished tower to the idyllic pastures of the farm, a new hub area, and even moving to blustering Arctic mountaintops on the city outskirts, the variety in style is hugely welcome. Not to say the original Destiny was at all a letdown here. The old Russia area gave an impressive sense of scale for its opening area, an autumnal wasteland of mountains and monolithic man-made structures. However, clearly Bungie has made some changes, not just to its engine, but also its creative processes, to allow a more varied set of environments. But is this mainly due to an upgrade in its underlying tech, or a matter of more efficient development? Hi, it's Tom here, today with an analysis of Destiny 2, focusing on the final game's strengths and weaknesses, and also later on how the available versions compare between PS4, PS4 Pro and Xbox One. But first, let's flash back to the original Destiny. In 2014, this was a game built to run on both current and last gen systems, meaning the limits of PS3 and Xbox 360 had to be factored in. According to Bungie staff members, it wasn't an easy process of development as a result, where scaling across so many systems slowed production down. At HandmadeCon 2016, engineering director Chris Butcher explained that its engine has roots in the Halo Reach technology, which ultimately formed part of the problem. Relying on this legacy tech, where results are compiled on console first rather than PC, meant the pipeline for creating assets proved excruciatingly slow. Any change to a map or weapon could take hours to compile across all formats, which in effect may have had an impact on the amount of content in the original Destiny. In this respect, Destiny remains a gorgeous game, but you have to wonder what was left on the table due to workflow issues. For Destiny 2 in 2017, however, the industry has moved on. PS4 and Xbox One are the primary focus, along with PS4 Pro and Xbox One X offshoots, plus of course an upcoming PC version. The stricter 512MB RAM limitations on last gen can be pushed aside, meaning bigger, more ambitious areas built from a revised engine framework designed purely for newer systems and PC. There may be more machines here to factor in, but ultimately Bungie learnt lessons from its experience on Destiny, and looking at Destiny 2, the turnout really speaks for itself. Thrown into the misty forests of the European Dead Zone, there's simply a more organic, developed look to the game's planets. Take the new farm hub area as an example. The attention to detail is a big upgrade over the original Destiny's tower. It's the small touches that make up a grander picture. It's the detailed brickwork surrounding the fountain and the books and abandoned monitors lining the hangar. It's the turn of the watermill with splashing water showing off the game's eye-catching reflections, complete with anamorphic lens flare and bloom. It's even the moss draping around giant rusting structures to the farm's edge, and swaying army camouflage overhead, creating dynamic shadow details on the ground. And yes, it may be basic, but physics are used on the outskirts to create a throwaway football game. All of these stylistic flourishes help to give Destiny 2 some character. The original game could dazzle with its broad environments, but this time, Bungie's also put its efforts into the micro-level detail. With more talking characters, NPCs, and even wildlife wandering around the farm, this new hub area ties the game together in a more personable way. And really, it's that mixture of great art direction and technology that gives the game moments like this. Lighting plays a huge role, not just stylistically, but in the game design for the EDZ. Similar to its use in some levels in Halo Combat Evolved, a mist overwhelms the area to keep enemies obscured until the last moment, best shown around volumetric lights on nearby fires. It creates an eerie effect and adds a great sense of atmosphere overall. And likewise, light shafts emanate from a low sun occluded by branches here, at once creating a natural effect while obscuring the terrain ahead. Volumetric buffers are even used to give depth around interiors, giving that musty, smoggy feeling to the opening tower siege. Really, the use of volumetrics is far more pronounced across Destiny 2 than in the original Destiny, and evidently, Bungie's keen to show off the effect right away in the tutorials. There is a downside though. As we saw in the Destiny 2 beta, this lighting pass uses a low resolution buffer, creating obvious pixel artifacting on edges. Check out this example on the edges of the ruined city. Alongside depth of field and other alpha effects, it's clear there isn't one native resolution at play, but several working in tandem. These lit elements stand out as a result, and even on the PS4 Pro footage you're seeing here running at a dynamic 4K output, there's still some residual noise on that edge. Regardless, the end result still impresses, and artistically, the payoff in visual design is worth that compromise. In talking about lighting, we also need to consider the effects that go with it. Dynamic, physics-based particles are a big focus in Destiny 2, whether that's the explosion of sparks from gunfire or weather effects like the lit particles used for rain. Destiny always pushed for a deluge of alpha during firefights, but the sequel clearly cranks things up a notch. From the very first mission protecting a besieged tower, you face waves of giant legionnaires and centurions, each bombarding the screen with lit transparencies. Add in the screen space effects from the rain landing on the camera, plus chromatic aberration, and as a way to push the engine from the very start, this is an amazing showcase. The only unfortunate limit here is that alpha resolution is cut down to support their quantity. As mentioned earlier, a low resolution buffer is used that can stand out on PS4 at a native 1080p and especially PS4 Pro's 4K support, meaning the appearance of effects can be at odds with the sharpness of the presentation otherwise. On the plus side, because these effects flash by within a split second, the cutbacks are hard to spot unless you freeze a frame. Of course, with all that comes an attractive post-effects pipeline. Much like the original, a bokeh depth of field kicks in when scoping your rifle, or even while the camera puts you in the foreground. Again, there's some aliasing here on overlapping edges, but it otherwise adds a cinematic air to the game in the heat of the action. That applies to the screen and object-based motion blur as well, an effect applied sparingly in general gameplay while revved up in intensity when using a super ability. For a game with a 30 FPS target on console, this motion blur does a world of good to the sense of fluidity while turning the camera. Each sampled frame blends with the next to create a smoother rotation, and there's no sign of banding along the way. It looks superb. The materials and shader work are also stand out given the scale of each level. However, reflections deserve particular praise this time around. The original Destiny got this mostly right in terms of matching geometry and light sources, but occasionally a generic cube map would misplace the details in the water. In Destiny 2, again, we're seeing accurate mapping of the world and enemies across puddles and fountains on the floor. The only limit is that particles and alpha effects from weapons don't show up at all, something we saw in the original. One area that makes a welcome return is the game's dynamic shadows. Cast by the player's flashlight, much like the effect in the Halo game's interiors, it delivers player shadows across the scene. The quality of the effect varies by console, as I'll cover later, but it retains the dynamics of the original Destiny, and even objects far away cast shade to the ground. All in all then, Destiny 2's technology isn't a revolution over the original, but a refinement. Is it as big a jump as from say Halo 1 to 2? Not quite. What we have instead is an augmentation of what came before. In terms of its micro details, world scale and effects work, there's plenty to show for the 3-year wait. Add in Destiny 2's sharp increase in real-time cutscenes, and it's clear this is a more ambitious project in the hands of a developer now at ease with its toolset. Equally, these extra scenes do a great job of adding more characters to the mix. Even with the fairly conventional beats to its plot, it's satisfying to see your customized character interacting with the universe's narrative, something that couldn't be achieved with pre-rendered scenes. All of which brings us to the big question: which version should you play? Well, with PC still slated for an October 24th release, we're looking purely at consoles at launch. The setup is similar to the beta, but we have new observations, and in terms of resolution and visual effects, the pecking order is clear. In the absence of Xbox One X hardware, PS4 Pro represents the very best way to play the game on console right now, and that starts with image quality. Running dynamically between 3072 by 2160 up to 3840 by 2160 via checkerboard rendering, PS4 Pro brings a markup in fine detail across long distances. Every game's use of checkerboard rendering on PS4 Pro so far can vary slightly, and artifacts appear more obvious in some games than others. I'm glad to say Destiny 2's approach is of the subtle kind though. Whip pan camera shots rarely reveal any interlaced patterns on edges. In fact, it took several 4K screen grabs of fast moving action before I spotted a case of it on enemies far into the distance, while every other edge in that shot appears perfectly clean. Now once blended with its motion blur, Destiny 2's checkerboard rendering technique takes us to a convincing 4K effect, and the limits are hard to spot. What's more, the game dynamically adjusts the resolution based on load on the horizontal axis, from 3072 right up to 3840. However, even during a stress test in the tower defense segment, I couldn't spot a single drop from a full 3840 by 2160. It's crisp, clear, and if there is a drop below that resolution on PS4 Pro, it'll take playing much further, perhaps in intensive raid battles, to really see a drop. The outlook is great on PS4 Pro, we're now putting at 4K, and it's good news for 1080p screen users too. If you own a full HD display, you still get that 4K picture super sample to your 1920 by 1080p output. What that amounts to is less flicker, less shimmer, and less noise on subpixel details in general, the kind that's easy to spot around the farm hub area. Take this as an example. A regular base PS4 renders at a native 1080p, but still shows a lot of pixel crawl on distant geometry, grass, and the camouflage netting high above. On a PS4 Pro outputting at 1080p though, well, it's vastly improved, and the image is all the better for it. It's a cleaner presentation thanks to Bungie's use of the machine's extra GPU resources. One way or another, PS4 Pro is the ideal way to play right now. Meanwhile, a standard PS4 is fixed at a native 1080p, while Xbox One relies on a dynamic system, running the gamut from 1344 by 1080 up to 1920 by 1080, depending on load. Simply put, Xbox One operates much like the first Destiny. The resolution divide is clear, but are there any other visual enhancements between the three? Well, between a regular PS4 and Xbox One, there's no difference in setup. The level of detail, texture quality, and effects work are much the same. It's on PS4 Pro that we see real improvements though, potentially broaching PC's higher graphics settings. Whether you run at 4K or 1080p, you get an improvement to texture filtering for starters, which goes hand in hand with its higher rendering resolution to give clearer surfaces. To be clear, the materials stay the same, but their presentation is much sharper at tight angles. Next up, PS4 Pro gets a boost in shadow rendering quality. This is a meager bump, but worthwhile overall. Other consoles suffer from heavy dithering on character self-shadows, but on PS4 Pro this is less pervasive thanks to a reduction in dithering. Up close, shadows are still unflattering at times, pixelated and contoured with speckle artifacts. But at least on PS4 Pro, these issues are pared back next to a regular PS4 and Xbox One, and it represents what we could see on PC's higher shadow preset. In general, the visual setup is almost identical between the three, but as one of the more demanding settings, Pro shadow upgrades are great to see. Last of all is a bump to geometry draw distances on PS4 and PS4 Pro. Now looking close at detail-rich environments like the farm, the draw distance for shadows and grass are identical between PS4, PS4 Pro and Xbox One. They all pop in at the same range, and quite obviously as well. The one main advantage on PS4 systems though is the rocks here switch their level of detail much sooner, at a greater distance. We're seeing higher poly assets rendered in from further afield, which eventually make the switch on Xbox One once you get closer. These are subtle enhancements for PS4 users. The chief advantage on a PS4 Pro though really is in that bump to 4K with checkerboarding, but we're not being shortchanged in the visual department. Perhaps with PC we'll see just how far Destiny 2 can be pushed though. Through all the pros and cons of its visuals per platform, one thing remains consistent: the frame rate. Really, across countless hours of testing, PS4, Xbox One and PS4 Pro, there are simply no drops under 30 FPS to report. As far as the single player campaign goes, a stress test at the start of the game shows a fixed 30 FPS line on PS4 Pro running at 4K. And that applies to the standard PS4 as well, plus the Xbox One release, which I've put side by side here in the same test on the Besieged Tower. Both consoles run at identical visual settings at 30 FPS, barring resolution. It does seem Xbox One is most prone to occasional frame pacing issues, causing a small stutter at points, though in general it's a solid result. Another aspect worth touching on is PvP multiplayer in the Crucible. Interestingly, the game has shifted from 6v6 battles in the original game down to 4v4, despite there being really no signs of frame rate drops in the first Destiny. Either way, we have PS4 Pro in action online here, where in general, engine demands have a different weighting compared to its campaign. The world size is more contained, for example, but as ever, action is focused on the more dynamic, hectic human battles with vehicles ready from the start. Why the drop to 4 players each side then? Well, it's possible gameplay balance is a factor here, but otherwise, GPU overhead has to factor in a worst case scenario, and all players could potentially meet in one spot to unleash super abilities and heavy weapons. In theory, Destiny 2's push for more effects-laden moves may have pushed Bungie towards making a cut in this area to preserve a 30 FPS lock. Alternatively, and a more likely theory for chopping out 2 players, is the move to its new server system. Destiny 2 now offloads most hosting and game logic tracking to Bungie's own servers, rather than relying on client consoles. Compared to the original Destiny, this may have forced the team to shift its priorities for its online play. One advantage is that we no longer have to wait for host migration, and if one player drops out, the game seamlessly carries on. Either way, 4v4 performance remains a fixed 30 FPS from what I've tested on PS4 Pro, and that's the case on a regular PS4 too. All signs really suggest the biggest drops, if there are any, will come from the game's campaign mode or during PvE raids. The turnout on Xbox One equally makes use of its dynamic frame buffer to a similar effect as solo play, dropping to 1344 by 1080 to keep the game at a steady 30 frames per second across each matchup. But as ever, there is a risk of frame pacing issues. Pushing past that 30 FPS lock, PC is clearly a big priority for Bungie in terms of support. The developer has stated Destiny 2's game logic and the number of enemies on screen limits consoles to 30 FPS, but on PC the CPU limits aren't an issue and frame rates can be unlocked. Here we have some early B-roll footage of the beta, with the settings menu showing scope for 4K resolutions, higher presets on every setting, MSAA support, plus an adjustable FOV slider and an option for 21:9 aspect ratio screens. Clearly, Bungie's putting a lot of work into this PC rendition. Right now, I suspect PC's high settings represent the console experience, and it'll be fascinating to see how much further its visuals can be pushed. Next to a PS4 Pro, there's a lot here that could dethrone it as the definitive release. Potentially further draw distances, improved shadow resolution, and the removal of those low resolution buffers for lighting and effects we have on console. On top of that, and provided you have the right hardware, a true native 4K is on the cards. Our early beta analysis shows a GTX 1070 can happily pull off 3840 by 2160 at 60 FPS if you dial back some settings. Meanwhile, a GTX 1080 Ti tackles it with no drawbacks. Even a much older GTX 970 delivers a true 4K at a half refresh 30 FPS, avoiding any of the dynamic res shifts or checkerboarding seen on PS4 Pro. For PC users, all this potentially combines to make it worth the wait until October 24th, though for now, PS4 Pro shows the game at its very best. The potential of the Xbox One X release is ripe of course, with Microsoft's new hardware launching 2 weeks after PC, a story for another day we can't wait to tackle. For now, Destiny 2 marks the start of 2017's major blockbuster releases, and it kicks it off with a bang. As a technical evolution over the original game, it's a satisfying one, where each world springs to life more vibrantly and with more variety. And while there is a paring back on the multiplayer side, the new servers do mean no more waiting around for host migration to kick in. After a long wait following Destiny's last expansion, it's a relief to see Bungie still on top of its game. Anyway, that's enough from me. If you found this analysis useful or insightful in any way, please do like this video and subscribe for more Destiny 2 focused content. And with this video encoded at 4K to show off PS4 Pro's visuals, it's well worth checking out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for the original source file. But until next time, thanks for watching.